underneath that were trying to convince me it was okay, and that I could do it. They were telling me I would still be acting responsibly, and she wanted it. They fucking taunted me. They were all I could think about, and I clenched my eyes closed as I felt her teeth sinking into my neck, pushing me and pulling me into doing something she likely wasn't fucking ready for. I breathed deeper into her curls, letting her flowers and cookies remind me of why this was so important. It was too spur of the moment, driven by lust alone as I pushed my fingers into her. It would hurt and she would bleed, and I had no fucking idea what it was like to do that to a girl. To my girl. And I couldn't bear to see her regret it in the morning, as she lay beside me, sore, and deflowered, and so fucking tainted by the teenage hormonal motherfucker. I shook my head vehemently against her shoulder. And that was the point where I stopped enjoying it so much. I remembered this wasn't about me. I was getting my girl off, and then I was doing mine myself. She whimpered at my refusal, rocking against my finger, and finally letting the skin of my neck go as I pressed into her sensitive butt once again. I needed her to come quick, so that she wouldn't tempt me any fucking further, and I already was.
Please.
She begged desperately, as she fisted my hair roughly. Fucking begging to feel my dick inside of her and making my teeth grind as my fingers moved more purposefully. I shook my head again, panting through my nose, and bunching her curls up into a trembling fist behind her back. Trying to focus on anything else but her palm around me pumping fervently, and that box of condoms nestled in my dresser. She growled, frustrated, and impossibly more desperate, and pushed herself lower into my lap so that I entered her further. I knew her frustration was growing every second she wasn't reaching her climax, and my time was running out. The dresser suddenly appeared so much closer to the bed. She shook her fucking head against my neck, ceasing her rocking and driving while she gasped into my skin. Her body and hands went still as my fingers kept working. She pleaded once more in a husky whisper. It pissed me off, because she was delaying it so that she could convince me to fuck her. That one goddamn word that was going to break me if she didn't just come already. I was thankful she stopped stroking my dick, but it didn't stop my fingers and thumb from their urgent efforts. I breathed raggedly into her neck, and shook my head again, pumping in and out of her and moving my thumb intently. But she still wouldn't move with me, and I could feel her tensing against the pleasure of my hand, staving it off in silent resistance. Let go. I panted huskily into her skin, while my fingers made their movements, and my fist shook in her soft hair. She whimpered again, shaking her head, and pulling my hair in her fist tightly to break my resolve. I clenched my jaw painfully as I brought my lips up to her ear, annoyed, and fucking pissed off. God damn it, Bella. I hissed through my teeth, feeling her tits against my chest, and her little hand wrapped around my dick, and growing agitated as I fisted her hair tightly. Fucking come for me. I growled, plunging my fingers deeper and curling them in while my thumb rubbed her clit harshly. It worked. I felt her constrict around my fingers as her body became rigid and her fist tightened painfully in my hair. I regretted not being able to see her face as she buried it into the crook of my neck once again. I felt her tongue on my skin as she made the sexiest cry into it with her hot and wet open mouth. It might have been an actual word, but I couldn't tell. A shudder resonated through her body as I felt her dripping down my fingers. And with one final writhe and whimper against me, she was panting, and gasping, and collapsing lifelessly in my lap. And I survived. Sighing into her curls and removing my fingers from her. She was entirely fucking limp on top of me, with her hand still in my pants. So I brought a hand down and yanked her wrist out and away from my erection successfully. So fucking glad that I beat the hormonal teenage motherfucker. I laid us back, letting her fall completely on my chest, and straightening my legs out. I was ignoring the way her chest felt against mine as I brought my arms around her and stroked her hair tenderly. She was still panting, resting her cheek on my shoulder, while she remained lifeless, and probably pretty fucking satisfied. It wasn't a double like last time, but I did manage to get her off against her own will. I figured that was probably something to be pretty fucking smug about. Of course I couldn't really think of anything like that, because I was still restraining the urge to push my hips into her as she lay on top of me. I kissed her head affectionately, closing my eyes, and batting down the hormones. And kind of fucking impatient to take care of myself because there was no way in hell I was pitching the stent until morning. Suddenly, Bella shot up from my chest, making my arms snap off of her back. As she glared down at me, her face was red and flushed, and her curls were dangled as they flowed down her shoulders and rested on her heaving breasts, where her necklace rested just above her cleavage. I stared at them a beat longer than entirely fucking necessary, before I quirked an eyebrow up at her quizzically. She shoved her palms into my shoulders sharply, making me bounce on the bed for a second as I furrowed my brows in confusion.
"What the hell is wrong with you?"
she asked incredulously as I instinctively brought my hands to her waist. She looked a little pissed, and maybe, as I saw her eyes cast slightly downward, a little fucking hurt. My eyes widened and I lurched up along with her, bringing her into my arms, and completely mortified that I had somehow hurt her by doing all that shit. I knew it would come back to bite me in the ass as I cupped her head, and brought her cheek to my shoulder. She huffed, raising her palms to my shoulders, and pushing me away gently. Which really fucking made me panic as I let her go, and slid my hands down her bare sides nervously. She frowned, as she gazed at me, running her little hand up and down my chest softly.
"What are we waiting for?"
she whispered, bringing her bottom lip into her mouth, and biting it. Still flushed a light red, and not helping with the erection situation in the least. But then I realized what she was so upset about, and I rolled my fucking eyes, flopping down onto the bed again, and trying to calm my heart rate since she wasn't completely disgusted by how far I went. Instead she was upset I didn't go farther. I sighed as she frowned down at me, trying to keep my gaze away from her chest and on her big brown eyes. "The right moment?" I said hesitantly while shrugging one shoulder, and clenching my teeth a bit at the way she was straddling me. It wasn't a good position for keeping the hormonal teenage motherfucker at bay, especially with the direction this conversation was heading. She rolled her eyes as her hands rested on my stomach.
"It's never going to be the right moment,"
she said in a tone that suggested much annoyance. Her eyebrows furrowed in frustration.
"Especially if you're too busy convincing yourself it's not the right moment to ever recognize it."
She raised her eyebrows at me expectantly. I weaved around that reasoning to the more important point as she stared down at me. "You're not fucking ready," I said, matter-of-factly. And I didn't mean she wasn't ready for sex, because it wasn't my place to make that assumption, though I was fairly fucking confident she wasn't realizing the pain involved. But she definitely wasn't ready for the teenage hormonal motherfucker. My comments seemed to fuel her agitation even more as I watched her jaw tense and her eyes narrow. I braced myself for the frightening kitten. "Don't fucking laugh." She jutted her chin out and rounded her shoulders back, making her breasts poke out as my eyes involuntarily darted down to them, heaving behind her shiny curls, as her pale, pink flesh swelled from over the red lace. She had one jagged scar below her breasts, longer and deeper than the rest of the smaller ones, that led one's vision right up to her cleavage from her stomach. It was taunting me from above and below. My fucking fingers twitched.
"I'm so tired of that crap,"
she growled, forcing my eyes to hers, and away from her tits and scars. As she glowered down at me, I quirked an eyebrow at her again. For someone who was just graced with a delightfully satisfying unicorn, after a month of continually mounting sexual frustration, she was acting pretty fucking moody. She huffed, blowing a few strands of hair up and away from her face.
"Everybody treating me like a damn child."
Her hands flew up in the air in a gesture of exasperation. "Frightening kitten indeed," she continued, shifting her eyes around the wall behind my bed, and seething.
"Always begging me for poor little Bella, who can't grow, or make decisions for herself."
She spoke through clenched teeth with her hands fisted at her sides.
"I hate being treated like a child."
She growled once again, narrowing her eyes as her fury grew and escalated. I sighed. Long and deep, and rather agonizingly, as I brought my hand to my hair, and combed it back from my forehead. Those words ate away at my fucking heart. "Is that why you're so goddamn eager to do it?" I whispered grimly while massaging my sore scalp, to just prove them all wrong. I accused, feeling fucking devastated at the thought of it, but knowing my girl well enough to think it. She always wanted to be treated normal, and the lengths she would go to fill that void were often fucking ridiculous. Her eyes widened, and her jaw fell at my assumption as she gaped down at me with parted lips and a shocked expression. Either because I was so fucking spot on about it or so entirely wrong. Her face suddenly fell, and casted downwards, as her hands came up to rub my stomach, her long dark curls tickling my scarred flesh, as her shoulders slumped. I gripped my fist in my hair, fucking terrified that I was striking a chord, and praying she would just lie to me if it were true. She sighed, peeking up at me through her lashes with a pained expression, but I didn't let go of my hair, as she slowly eased down onto my chest, pressing her warm breasts against me and letting her cheek fall back to my shoulder. The cold silver of her necklace shocked my overheated skin, as it became wedged between us. Her little hand came up to pry my fist loose from my hair as I stared up at the ceiling dismally.
"That's not it,"
she whispered while working to free my grip. I let my hair go, dropping my arm to my side once again, as she stroked my hair gently with her fingers. And I really wanted to believe her, but nothing else could explain her constant scrambling pace to some non-existent finish line. The way she always fucking pushed me farther instead of just taking shit slow. The room was silent for a long while, and I felt so shitty as I stared up at the ceiling, and felt her heartbeat against mine. Because even as the possibilities still made my chest ache painfully, my dick was still throbbing, and hard, and begging for me to push into her. I felt her sigh again, as she brought a finger to my arm, tracing a lazy line into my skin.
"J.E. man Dow Jowerst attempts."
She whispered softly in something that sounded like French. And I was going to have to excuse myself if she started talking all fucking sexy in foreign languages and shit. But she sounded really sad, so I just shifted my head to quirk an eyebrow down at her questioningly from where her cheek rested on my shoulder. She never met my gaze as her finger glided up and down my arm, and her curls spilled over my chest in waves.
"My mom used to do the craziest stuff."
She sighed with a small smile flirting at her lips, tickling my arm with her fingertip.
"She'd take classes for stupid things like Tai Chi and pottery."
She rolled her eyes a little, but she was still smiling. It was obviously something endearing. And I had never heard much about her mother aside from her death. So I listened pretty fucking intently as she spoke.
"She was always trying to drag me along to classes."
She shook her head gently against me as her finger weaved over my skin.
"Especially French."
She chuckled quietly. And I fucking chuckled too, making her bounce on my chest a bit. I didn't get the joke, but it was just instinct to laugh when my girl did. I brought my hand up to caress her hair, as it spilled over my chest and onto the blanket. Her eyes darted up to mine.
"She thought it would be cool for us to have secret conversations that no one understood,"
she explained with a soft snicker, shifting her gaze back to her finger as it traced a circle on my shoulder. Her snicker died off as her fingertip faltered in its movement momentarily.
"I refuse to go,"
she whispered in a treble voice with an infinitesimal grimace. I frowned at her and brought my arms around her waist, while she tickled my shoulder.
"She was so disappointed when she ended up going alone, and I felt terrible for it,"
she continued, still fucking troubled, and making me hug her tighter because I didn't like that shit. She smiled after that though. Secretive and scandalous, as she darted her eyes back to mine.
"I ended up learning French anyways."
She smirked up at me as her hand finally rested on my arm.
"I spent months learning